Let's talk now, though, to Andrew Rosindell, Conservative MP for Romford over in Essex, because apparently, apart from all sorts of other things that have been affected by the lockdowns and by COVID-19 and by the problems of not being able to do business properly, zoos are also in need of looking after. Let's find out from Andrew precisely why that is. Andrew, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us. I suppose it's not something that's very high on everybody's radar, Andrew, but I guess animals being looked after, regardless of whether you agree with the existence of zoos or not, costs a lot of money, right? And if you can't get anybody in to get revenue to do that, there's a problem.
Completely right. I mean, we have some of the best zoos, aquariums and safari parks in the world. And they're not just animal attractions. These places are centres of education, of conservation, and also they work in other countries to help protect endangered species. So, these aren't just monkeys' tea parties like, we thought of years ago. And the animal welfare criteria is extremely high in this country. So these are institutions that deserve our support. And at the moment, they're suffering very badly. They're not getting the support because they're not getting people going through their gates. They're losing a lot of money. And it does mean that some zoos have already closed, others could close. And certainly the conservation work they're doing is being threatened. So the government do need to step in, and they haven't got the policy quite right yet. And that's why I've written to Boris. That's why I'm meeting Zach Goldsmith tomorrow. And I'm urging the government to step in to save Britain's zoos.
And what was the situation between the lockdowns, as it were? I mean, we opened up hospitality on July the 4th. I mean, were any zoos able to open sort of during and after that period?
Well, it was a disaster to start with because they weren't able to open and they weren't getting any support. And okay, you can furlough a zookeeper, but you can't furlough an animal. The animal still needs looking after. It still needs a zookeeper to be there. It still needs veterinary care. It still needs 24-hour looking after. So it was pretty much a disaster. In the end, the government did bring in a fund, but the fund has been ineffective. They put a lot of money into 100 million into a fund, but only a very small number of zoos have been able to access that money because the criteria is so tricky. The box ticking is too much. So the government needs to change this, allow the zoos that need the cash to get the money, to keep the zoos going through the winter, and have a new scheme to support them going through into 2021-22 until hopefully finally things get back to normal again.
Yeah, because obviously, I mean, many of the zoos will have indoor areas, but many of them will also have outdoor areas, which presumably you might consider being able to open those for the public, wouldn't you?
Well, I would. I don't think they should be closed at all. It's wrong. I think the zoos should remain open. I think they've done a huge amount of work to ensure that they are COVID safe, to allow social distancing and all the rest of it that we have to do these days. And they've really done everything possible to do so. There's absolutely no reason why they shouldn't be open any more than some other of the organisations and outdoor groups that you've mentioned. I think it's much more risky being in a park where there are crowds of people going for walks and runs and cycling than it is walking around a zoo where it's managed and where social distance is perfectly possible.
Well, that's right. I mean, there are so many anomalies. There are so many anomalies, aren't there? Because I mean, people that I work with here at News UK will come in sometimes on the tube, on trains from outside of London, and I'm told that the trains are now quite busy currently. So, I mean, if you go on a train with a load of people, presumably you could go and walk around a zoo.
100%, yes, Mike. You're completely right. There's no logic to this at all. There's no logic to a lot of this with the lockdown, I'm afraid, and that's why I'm a bit sceptical of what we're doing on this. I think that I'm here to talk about zoos. I could talk about lockdown, but zoos...
well, we can do both.
But zoos, I think, are a special case. You can't just close a zoo down. It's not like a shop. You can close it, you can lock up a shop and leave it for a month. You can't do that with a zoo. You can close a sports club down. You can close a theatre down. You can't do that with a zoo. These are creatures that need our love and attention. They need care. They need round-the-clock looking after, and they need people there to do it. And also, the other thing is that a lot of people haven't thought of is that if you're an animal and you're used to seeing people every day, people coming in and getting that human attention, if you're not getting that human attention, surely don't you think the animal could be traumatized and confused? So, animals are are, sensitive. And, the change with a zoo closing is not good for the animals either. There's all sorts of reasons why closing zoos is a bad idea. So the zoo should be allowed to reopen immediately, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes, and how much money how much money do you think it's going to take, Andrew? Because obviously you'll be having those conversations with Boris and others.
Well, there's 100 million already earmarked for it, of which only a fraction has been used. So we've got a good start. We fought for that money. The Treasury agreed it, but they've made all this criteria around it, which makes it very difficult to use. So 100 million is a good start, but I do think it's going to be a lot more than that. It's probably going to be at least twice that amount, and maybe a bit more. But when you consider the enormously important work of our zoos in the UK, the conservation education work they do, and when you also consider the horrific prospect of zoos closing and animals being lost because of it, I think that's not what the British people want. I think if there's one thing that I think we can all agree on, is that our wonderful zoo community in the UK, which is one of the best in the world, that we should protect it and make sure that we don't lose it during this lockdown period.
No, quite. And while we have you, Andrew, let's just have a quick word about lockdown, because we're hearing this morning that there may well be a consideration for a further lockdown closer to Christmas. Only, I think, 38 Tory backbenchers voted against the government last time around. Presumably, there might be more who would vote against the government if there is to be another suggestion of a lockdown.
I would think so, yes. Look, I'm puzzled by all this. I have to admit, I don't agree with having a further lockdown. I do agree that the whole country should protect and look after those who are vulnerable, that we should do everything we possibly can to behave in a sensible way to avoid the spread of the virus. There are people that have been irresponsible, I accept that, but I think the vast majority of people just need to go about their business and get on with their lives and keep their businesses running. I worry that the long-term effects of these lockdowns are going to be absolutely catastrophic in terms of our economy, in terms of jobs, people losing their homes, in terms of mental health and other health issues that will come out of this. I think we should balance this whole thing up a bit more.
Yeah, I think that's right, because it's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it, to hear scientists saying, well, we don't think the lockdown's working, so we better keep it going for a bit longer. Well, if it's not working, then maybe we should just reconsider doing it at all.
Well, exactly. Look, I'm confused by a lot of this. I mean, I look at some of the figures, all very confusing, and they're very hard to really understand what's going on. There's only one figure that I look at that tells me mostly of what I need to know, and that's the death rate now compared to this time last year. When I last looked, the death rate was only a tiny bit higher at the moment than it was this time last year. And it amounted to effectively, on average, one extra death per constituency compared to last year.
Right.
Now, tell me if I'm wrong on that, if I've misread the figures.
No, I don't think so.
If that is the case, what is this all about? Is it really, collapsing our economy and sending us into years of unemployment, of businesses collapsing, and think of the debt we're saddling around the next generation. This is the biggest debt in the entire history of this country, and we're handing this to the next generation to pay off. I think that we need to balance this up very quickly, whilst I do emphasise protecting the vulnerable, the elderly, the people that need looking after until we get that vaccine. But we've got to keep Britain moving. Let's keep business working. Otherwise, we're going to suffer more in the long term.
I think you're absolutely right, Andrew. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to talk to us. Andrew Rosindell, Conservative MP for Romford, in Essex, talking about the need for zoos to get some more help, because he's quite right. You can shut down a gym, you can shut down a shopping centre, you can shut down a sports club, you can shut down all manner of things, but you cannot shut down a zoo, because there are animals there that need feeding, they need looking after, and obviously, surely, you might even say they could have visitors, couldn't they? 0344 499 1000